2 archetype creature from Born of the Gods, white, white 1, and it gives your creatures first strike, and they cannot.
So that's Bradley Brown on your right playing the Niagara list. John Shaw on your left playing Jund Monsters.
Yep. Bradley starting with the Temple, a very needed card in the green-white aggro list, pre-Born of the Gods.
Huge upgrade over the slot that was there previously.
He's got a second one there.
And I really like as Johnny Caller the Pride of Bradley's list. It's such a powerful synergy with Advent of the Worm.
Interesting that Bradley kept a hand with no 1-drop, but the double Temple there.
Yep, Experiment 1 and Soldier Pantheon in his list that we typically see in the Selesnya aggro lists, but without any 1-drops. But some power in there. Looks like Advent in his hand.
Yeah, and a Voice Resurgence there. John Shaw just had the Elvish Mystic off another tapped land.
And Sacred Foundry kind of reveals that there's something different going on with Bradley's list.
And a Domri here from John. She'll tick up, hide the card from us, but missed obviously.
And missing a land drop critically. But missing on a Domri often implies that there's a land on top, so.
Yep. Bradley finds his 4th land, bashes with Voice Resurgence, passes with 4 up.
A suspicious 4 mana.
Yeah, every time you play that 4th land and then pass confidently.
Both players know what's about to happen, but the Advent of the Worm player is still the happier party.
Yes. You know what's going to happen. And it looks like the Voice went in there against the Domri?
Correct.
Yep.
Yeah.
Second Planeswalker for John, this time Xenagos. Going with the 2/2 Satyr. This is the token I recommended all of the invitational winners or invitational top 8ers choose because it would get a ton of play.
So pretty bold attack there, sending the Satyr in. Bradley elects not to block, plays an Advent here. Maybe could have jumped in front there and gotten the Satyr off the board, but still pretty commanding position here for Bradley.
Yep. And now he has the Giant Worm on the board.
And 2 exposed Planeswalkers as well on John's side, so this could be a really good turn for Bradley. Selesnya Charm in hand, another green-white card, either Voice or Fleecemane Lion, potentially a lot of tools to work with.
Yep. The thing about this green-white deck is when it's running all the pump spells and tricks, you can just, really comes down to reading your opponent and attacking in, being able to use them accordingly. Also the added reach they give for killing Planeswalkers and stuff too. Goes with killing the Xenagos and knocking Domri down to 1 there with the attack.
Interestingly, elects not to Selesnya Charm his creature. He could have finished off Domri that turn, but looks like he has other plans.
Goes with the Fleecemane Lion. I saw his match last round. He was very conservative with his Selesnya Charms. But
Now, Fleecemane Lion is definitely a card that's picked up in power, I think, compared to where it was before Born of the Gods. Now with green-red monsters and Jund monsters much more prevalent, going monsters with a Fleecemane Lion comes up a lot more often than it did in the previous standard format.
Yep, it's a big upgrade over the Call of the Conclave 3/3 token.
Call of the Conclave still has its merits if you're playing it alongside populate effects like Rootborn Defenses and such, but.
John has a green-red Temple here, scried to the bottom. Looks like he missed on Domri again. He's got another Xenagos in hand. Mizzium Mortars.
But 5 toughness is sort of the flashpoint that matters against the Jund list, you know? They do have some Dreadbore type effects, but Mizzium Mortars is their primary removal spell. It can trade with Palakranos. Stormbreath Dragon can't touch it, so Advent of the Worm matches up very nicely against a lot of the components in the Jund monster list.
Yep. The Worm is vital to beating the monsters, usually. Getting in that trample damage, not caring about the opponent's creature's toughness, like you said. Palakranos, really the only thing that stands in its way.
So I'm curious, this seems like a really good spot to go monstrous with Fleecemane Lion if Bradley has access to a 5th mana. Then he has a lot of control over the Planeswalkers for the rest of the game.
Yep. Plus, it's nice to just have a creature that you know nothing's going to happen to.
Yeah.
Especially out of this deck, unless it happens to be running a Devour Flesh, you know. And even then, with your creature base, it's not a factor. Doesn't play the 5th land, doesn't have it. Swings in with everything.
I don't know if he doesn't have it. He might have other plans, but
True.
it does look like he has Temple Garden in hand, so he's choosing another path at least for this turn.
Using some deception here. Looks like John's going to throw the satyrs in front of a couple of the creatures.
Yeah, it looks like the 2 green-white creatures are going after Xenagos here, and John's making some effort to preserve Xenagos.
This is one thing I always had when I played the green-white deck against the monsters matchup, was how you deal with planeswalkers. Do you try to kill them, or do you just go after your opponent?
Rather, it's the worm is going at Xenagos right now, and then the other 2 creatures are Domri. But
So there's often that decision you have to make to go after the planeswalkers or just try to kill them if you have enough power in your hand.
so it looks like Bradley doesn't want to do anything else here, and just going to get his voice of resurgence token momentarily.
Yeah. Mr. Evan Irwin making an appearance.
In the elemental flesh.
Plays the Temple Garden tapped. And that's just a Gore Clan Rampager as a 4/4 trampler.
So this is a fairly risky line here. If John has a untapped mana and a Mizzium Mortars, he sort of starts to catch up in this game a little bit.
Just kills everything but the worm. And he could even kill the worm with the fight effect from Domri if he wanted to, right?
And there it is. You see it all, and it's cleared up. Bradley perhaps getting punished for his decision not to just go monstrous with Fleece Mainline last turn would have reduced his exposure quite a bit to that sequence.
Yes. Now he has to regroup here. And he has a Soldier of the Pantheon. And a second Rampager.
It is a charming feature of this deck how many gold pump spells it plays alongside Soldier of the Pantheon. I've always enjoyed that.
It's cute. You just kind of act like Soldier of the Pantheon's not there. You know, I can still play all these gold pump spells. It's a thing I talked with Brad Nelson about when he was pumping the Brave Naya deck. It's just something you unfortunately just have to play the 2/1 to have the beats against the control decks and the black decks to beat them.
And protection for multicolor is relevant against a lot of your opponents as well.
John here has the Stormblood Dragon coming into play tapped and attacking.
Looking to race.
Bradley's going to attack in for 6.
So John's hand's not that well suited to racing right now. He only has 2 copies of Domri in his hand. But if he finds a 7th land here, he swings it pretty considerably by going monsters with the Stormbreath Dragon.
Yeah. That makes it basically 2-turn clock. The Elvish Mystic, the promo version, and another Domri.
So that does mean that John does have access to 7 mana next turn.
Yep. Bradley catches the gain 1 life trigger. And John ticks up to reveal a...
Reaper of the Wilds
yeah,
off the top there from the Domri.
As you say, the baseball percentage for Soldier of the Pantheon, if you're hitting a third of the times you gain life, you're doing well.
Oh, wow, that's Boros Charm off the top. This might be a combo kill right now for this. If he...
Has he got Selesnya Charm?
He has Selesnya Charm and Boros Charm, so that's 12 points of damage right now with this Rampager.
Yep.
And it looks like John doesn't have much in the way of defense for this.
Yep. Even if he blocks, that's not enough. This is one of those situations where getting that early damage in is so important, so you can have access to these combo kills out of nowhere.
Yeah, and there's actually quite a bit of this going on in Bradley's list. He has this going on alongside a Ajani, which is another combo kill type of card.
Yep. And it looks like, unless John has something to mix it up here, that could be the end.
Yeah, I mean, there's some hesitation on Bradley's side here, not knowing if the coast is exactly clear, but he's going to go for it, it looks like.
Sometimes you just got to go for it.
And that's a Selesnya Charm, Boros Charm. That's 12 coming across here.
That's pretty much why you play the deck. It's for explosiveness like that. And Bradley takes game 1.
Pretty impressive stuff going on there. We're going to go over to the sideboards now. John Shaw, our John Monsters pilot, 3 copies of Mistcutter Hydra, 2 Ultimate Price, 2 Thoughtseize, a Mizzium Mortars, a Chandra Pyromaster, a Vraska the Unseen, 2 Sire of Insanities, 2 Golgari Charms, and Rakdos Return. Not really a lot going on in this matchup. He does have access to Ultimate Price, although that does not kill a lot of Bradley's threats. It still critically answers Advent of the Worm tokens, which is the toughest thing for him to answer. The Mizzium Mortars, I believe, will come in as well as another good removal spell, but the rest of this is really geared towards beating control decks, and I just don't think it offers much help here for John.
Right. Brad has 3 copies of Mizzium Mortars himself, couple Unravel the Ether, some Last Breaths, Banisher Priest, Glare of Heresy, Spirit of the Labyrinth, 2 Imposing Sovereign, and one of Druid's Deliverance, which is the Fog Populate card from Return to Ravnica.
Pretty powerful against beatdown decks from time to time.
Yep.
Usually you see that alongside lists that have Call the Conclave,
Yes.
supplementing.
And Rootborn Defenses for all of the Populate fun.
Right, that's a sort of a different deck here, but one, Druid's Deliverance, pretty powerful tool against mono red aggro or Naya hexproof decks that basically can only attack against you. That's their only avenue of interaction. So Druid's Deliverance can kind of form a time walk there in certain spots.
Definitely like the Imposing Sovereigns here in this matchup, as in getting all of their creatures to not be able to block and just making Stormbreath Dragon not as impressive. But Stormbreath Dragon is quite the beating for this deck if they use it to stabilize, because all of your creatures are basically white except for your Advent token.
Yeah, Gore-Clan Rampager gives Bradley a dimension against that card, but certainly Stormbreath is one of John's best tools.
Yeah. But as you can see there, the combo effect that Bradley's deck has enabled him to get basically 4 or 5 for 1 off of Mizzium Mortars and have a creature with trample and a couple of tricks, and that's all you need.
Not the first time we've seen top deck Boros Charm and result in someone dying.
Yes.
I wonder if Bradley will potentially change around the way that he approaches the matchup a little bit. I think against Jund Monsters, when you have a reasonable opening to go monsters with Fleece mainline, you kind of have to take it.
Yeah.
If you're killing them that turn, doing something else then that's different, or really advancing your board, but by and large, it's very challenging for them to answer that card once you get to that stage. And it's also hard for them to race against you as well. Fleece mainline can also be a very effective blocker if they get out in front of you.
Yep. Once you just have the mana for that, and then you're able to just, like I said earlier, create a creature that you never have to worry about going away, it just gives you that stability.
So you said you've played a lot of the Selesnya matchup. Bradley's deck obviously a little bit different. What do you think of the Planeswalkers in Jund Monsters in this matchup? That game, they didn't look particularly powerful. Xenagos was largely outclassed on the ground. The 2/2s weren't big enough to really do anything. Domri struggled to be productive. The fight power wasn't that helpful that match. Is that an aberrant game, or are the Planeswalkers just not very good?
One thing you'll notice is John didn't have any Sylvan Caryatids in that matchup. And Sylvan Caryatid combined with the Planeswalkers is what makes it so difficult, because the Sylvan Caryatid blanks all your 1-drops. Unless you're able to evolve your Experiment 1 multiple times, you're just getting blanked by that, and you're probably going to have to waste a pump spell. So if they have the Sylvan Caryatid backed up by the Planeswalkers, it's very difficult to make any headway. I often would choose to just ignore the Planeswalkers and just try to kill them, because if you get in that middle ground of fighting with some of the Planeswalkers while they're progressing their board, if they land like a Stormbreath Dragon, it's very difficult to win past that.
So Caryatid is the big fulcrum on which the
Caryatid is the card I never wanted to see,
Yeah.
because you pretty much always have to burn one of your pump spells to get rid of it. And if you have like a multiple Soldier of the Pantheon draw, you can't actually do that.
Absolutely. Remember to pull the monitor back before you kick to the booth. So game 2 about to get underway here. Players taking their time shuffling.
Yeah, I was about 50-50 in the green-white versus the monsters builds. I was always told it was a good matchup, but it seemed like any Sylvan Caryatid into Planeswalker draw was a very difficult game.
No, I basically agree with that assessment. My experience playing beatdown decks is similar. The Jund matchup is pretty favorable if they miss on Caryatid, but when they have it, it makes so many of their other tools so much more powerful.
Yep. All right, so we're looking at some opening hands here.
And it does look like John has the Caryatid. Bradley looks displeased.
Bradley was a very decisive player in the round I watched last round, so he does not give much away, but he does consider his options. Looks like he kept. John with the tapped Blood Crypt.
It looks like Bradley actually has a pretty strong hand here of all of his colors and Ajani and some substitute.
Temple of Triumph from him. And John is going to have the Caryatid. So this is a game where Bradley's probably going to need to go big in terms of Rampagers and things like that, Advents.
Although, interestingly enough, this is a place where Bradley's deck has distinctions from the green-white list. He has access to Mizzium Mortars in his sideboard, so something like Stormbreath Dragon isn't nearly the problem that it is for just the straight green-white build.
Yep. That's one thing I really like about this. It's not quite the Naya all-in Brave list that Brad was writing about a couple weeks ago, but it is the green-white base with the good red boost. And John has the Scavenging Ooze. Bradley's going to go with the Banisher Priest, taking away the ooze.
Banisher Priest, pretty powerful tool against Jund. Not the hardest for them to kill, but something they do have to kill, which is something.
John shocked himself so he can play a Stormbreath Dragon, and here's the opening we talked about. Early Stormbreath is difficult to get past unless he's got that Mortars.
Yeah. It appears that he does.
All right.
So we may see a pretty powerful turn here from Bradley.
Gonna get rid of that dragon immediately.
Now it looks like he's weighing between Fleecemane Lion and a Voice of Resurgence in his hand.
Couple of options there. He goes with the Fleecemane Lion.
Great turn, and again, something that the regular list does not have access to.
Yep. He's got another ooze in John's hand, as well as looks like a Mortars of his own and a Domri. Opts to go with the Planeswalker. Finds a Pelucranos. Of course, plays the second ooze.
So I understand the instinct there not to just kill the Banisher Priest, but you are running some risks here, knowing that there are cards like Boros Charm in Bradley's deck, because it's pretty critical to kill both of these creatures.
The Boros Charm giving the just indestructibility can blow people out when they're banked on having to get that removal spell.
So now Bradley, for example, can simply say, all right, play a land on tap and attack your Domri with my Fleecemane Lion. Do you block? All right, you want to block with your Scavenging Ooze? That's fine. And if not, then I get to go monsters and kill your Domri this turn.
Yeah, puts him in a tough situation, and he shocks himself to be able to do that as well. So
well, we'll see
now
what line.
He has the options.
Yeah. See how he wants to proceed here. His hand is stacked right now. There's a Boros Charm and a Najani and a Voice of Resurgence, so he's got a lot to work with.
Yep. This is one of those, uses the Boros Charm just to kill the Domri there, and then deploys the Ajani. So again, 5 mana opting not to monstrous the Fleecemane Lion, but getting 2 cards this turn and killing a Planeswalker and making his guy bigger.
This is a really high-risk plan against Mizzium Mortars, though.
It does look like John has it.
Yeah, the sequencing, you know, that turn was pretty powerful for Bradley, but I don't believe showed the appropriate respect for the threat of Mizzium Mortars there, and now he's in a little bit of trouble.
It's 2 games in a row. He got 3 or 4 for 1 off that Mortars. And John gets his ooze back with plenty of fodder in the graveyards.
And more critically, it was somewhat, if not preventable, at least there were measures he could have taken to reduce the likelihood of that happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Any aggro deck's usually living in fear of these 6 mana triple red. Brad does have his backup Voice of Resurgence, which makes a 3/3. John gets to untap here with a couple of oozes.
But you can feel him starting to get some breathing space here. Bradley's board isn't nearly as advanced this game than it was the first game, where it looked like John was pulling ahead, but then Bradley was able to steal the game out from under him.
You need a couple more creatures to go with that Ajani, especially ones with bigger power to make that -3 super effective.
And with that Ajani in play, John can only feel so secure because, again, the threat of Advent of the Worm plus Ajani flying and double striking is something he has to play around in all spots.
Plus, he's got 4 Boon Satyrs he can flash in once he gets 5 mana as well to have that on a creature and then instantly have, lethal as well. John now has access to quite a bit of green mana, though, to make his oozes bigger and get him above 10 life. So.
Yeah. And right now, John's attacking. I'm assuming that right now he's going after the Ajani.
As he does. Call of the Pride down.
And that's step 1 from John's side of making sure the game doesn't get stolen from him.
Yeah. Making sure you don't just get combo killed is very important.
Yeah. For example, next turn, if he had a Gore Clan Rampager, that's 14. You know? So it's a really threatening card in this deck.
Goes with the Domri. Makes the ooze a little bigger. Big enough to fight the voice profitably. Let's see if Bradley, does he still have the Selesnya charm?
No, he has a Boros charm in hand and a land.
Okay.
So again, John showing a lot of respect here for what Bradley can do instead of just dropping Palachronos, dropping Reaper of the Wilds, just trying to keep Bradley's board contained.
Yeah. Keeping all of their threats off makes it to where their combo kill is not a potential thing. He's going to get himself an Evan Irwin token.
Yeah, I think Bradley might have been contemplating using his Boros charm for indestructibility, but
use it to kill the Domri instead at end of turn there.
and now John's really far ahead and with a lot of tools left over.
Yep, the two oozes versus a 1/1.
And another 1/1 off the top, it looks like.
Here's the F&M Experiment 1.
And now John in complete control.
Yep, John just gets to make his ooze as big as he'd like and gain the life while doing so.
Not to mention all the power left over in his hand.
Yep, with the Xenagos, Pelucranos World Eater. Is that a Courser he's flipping through as well?
Reaper.
Reaper?
Yeah. So you could actually, this could be one of those turns where you see Xenagos actually generate mana potentially.
Yeah. He decides to go with the Reaper here.
I don't mind that. You can leave up hexproof mana.
Get in there with a couple of scavenging ooze.
And now John is essentially representing lethal next turn.
Yeah. I'm not quite sure anything Brad can draw here to get out of this from the green-white deck, even in a deck as explosive as this, without a combo piece already.
Yeah, that temple's not going to help.
And
All right.
the game 2 handshake that leads to game 3.
Yeah, for those of you watching at home, you know that wasn't actually a concession of the match as far as I can tell. We're simply going to game 3.
Yes. Always caught off guard when that is presented to me,
Yeah.
but some people like to do that. We'll be going back to the boards here. Bradley will importantly be on the play now, making his 1-drops much more powerful.
And it puts a lot of pressure on John to have a mana accelerant as well. There's a lot of hands where he simply can't keep them if they don't do anything until turn 3.
Needs the mana accelerants, and he needs those answers. Like if he's depending on Mizzium Mortars to take care of a threat, you know, his answers have to stack up in a unique order, basically, to be able to maximize his mana.
And the green-white deck, one of the compelling things about the Selesnya deck is the amount of range that it has access to. You wouldn't typically think of that being a green-white deck, but
Right.
there's Mistcutter Hydra, there's Ajani, there's Advent, there's all these pump spells where the deck can kind of went out of nowhere, even
Yeah.
where it appears the other deck stabilized. Bradley's build has that, and even further upping it with Gore-Clan Rampager and Boros Charm and Ajani, which is not a card you see in every list.
It was an idea I was toying with when I went to Grand Prix Cincinnati. You know, I was talking with Brad Nelson about the Brave Nihilist. I'm like, you know, I've enjoyed playing the green-white deck, but I sort of just want to play the green-white deck with Gore Clan and Boros Charm. And, you know, it clearly is working out for Brad here and gives the green-white deck the better creatures, I would argue. I would enjoy having Experiment 1 over Dried Militant any day.
Yeah.
And it gives you still the access for Gore Clan Rampager and Boros Charm.
Yeah, once you're in the world where, you know, you're going to a full 3-color deck like Bradley is, I start questioning the value of the 1-drops. You know, couldn't you kind of get away from that stuff and commit to playing the game, starting the game on turn 2? Maybe Experiment 1 is still good enough, but maybe Soldier of the Pantheon is not a card you're interested in.
And Bradley's deck is one of the best decks for Experiment 1. Any deck that can ramp up to Advent of the Worm is the deck that can make it a 4/4, you know, more than other decks usually.
Yeah, I mean, he can go, for example, Voice into Fleecemane Lion, into Boon Satyr, into Advent. That's as good a curve as you can possibly get for Experiment 1.
When you actually get to do that, it's a pretty good feeling.
Yeah. But the deck has to pull its mana in so many different directions here because, you know, you're playing cheap white creatures, cheap green creatures, and red spells. Whenever I look at lists like this, I always think to myself, is there a way to just bias the mana in one direction or another so you're a little less one-third with your color splits? I mean, Bradley doesn't need red mana on turn 2 for the most part. You know, it's a 2.5 color deck, but it still does have the Soldier of the Pantheon Experiment 1 issue that the Selesnya deck has as well.
And unless you're really needing that combo kill with, like, Rampager plus Boros Charm, you almost never need 2 red in 1 turn either.
Right.
So as long as you can do a Selesnya Charm plus a Boros Charm and things like that.
So again, I'm really curious to see if Bradley in this game is going to land a spot when he has a good opportunity to go monstrous with Fleece Mainline. I think in game 2 there, if that's his 5th turn, just attacking the Domri at 4 with a Fleece Mainline, that effectively either causes John to chump block with a Scavenging Ooze or lose his Domri, and Bradley gets a 4/4 indestructible for the remainder of the game, the game probably looks much different.
Yeah, I don't know if he really needed to get greedy on that board and really put out all those threats when you can have the 4/4 that's not going anywhere option. As well as putting John in that situation where you attack and force him to either give it up or lose the Planeswalker.
But in the event, on to game 3. As you mentioned, Bradley critically will be on the play.
Yep. Taking a look here at his opener.
Again, his deck probably has to mulligan a fair bit, the colored mana issues, and a sensitive curve.
Yes. But instead, John is the one taking the mulligan. The temples do add a lot of flexibility, though, to hands that don't have the turn 1 play.
Yes.
When you can filter out, when you're splashing red off of temples, it gives you so much more advantage to having that 3rd color that you can weed away extra lands, get rid of those 1/1s when they're like turn 7 or 8, things like that.
Yeah, the Naya Hexproof deck does a lot of that sort of thing. It very rarely goes turn 1, Glade Cover Scout, turn 2 enchantment, turn 3 enchantment, turn 4 enchantment. That's not a realistic draw that it gets. But the temples do stabilize the mana and make sure that it can find the right mixture of enchantments that it's looking for to cobble together a monster.
Right. Yeah, the deck rarely curves out like that, but it does have the potential to do that, which, sometimes just gives you free wins.
Yes.
So never a bad thing when you can just curve right up the curve and take them out with giant creatures that they don't expect.
Yeah.
1/1 turns into a 3/3. Those are problems.
Yeah, and Bradley's decks have a lot of the same element. It's not quite like a hexproof deck, but he does have this combo mix and match element to it with all the pump spells and double strike effects.
Yeah. And the Boros Charm also gives him just that resiliency against Supreme Verdict decks that a green-white deck does not have, because it often doesn't have Rootborn Defense's main deck. So. John looking at a 6-card hand here.
Looks like he's happy enough.
All right, starting out with a Temple of Plenty. That he keeps the card on top.
No hesitation.
Yep. John has a Temple of Abandon for himself.
2-headed giants, your round 4 pairings have been.
Looks like you got an Ooze and a Stormbright Dragon in that opener.
Yeah, no accelerant.
Are about to be posted.
He's going to have to play a regular game.
Yep. Bradley has the Experiment 1 on turn 2. And a 2nd Temple of Plenty.
Looks like no red mana in his hand currently, just a plains left over.
Did he just find his Caryatid, it looked like?
Looked like right off the top there.
Scryed away a card from his temple and found the Caryatid on top.
Rewarded. It's still not clear if he wants to deploy it this turn because he has nothing to do with the mana the following turn.
So he goes with the Ooze, as you expertly point out.
Well, I think there's still a good argument to just play the Caryatid that turn, because I don't think you really want to block here, nor do you want to race. So I would just rather get the mana set up.
Let's see what kind of creatures Brad has here to work with. Apparently, just going to get in there with a 1/1.
Okay.
And obviously representing Selesnya Charm.
And post-combat plays his Fleece Mainline. So he's really committed to trying to get this Experiment 1 up. I think he was willing to Selesnya Charm inside of combat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Bradley may have forgotten to play a land last turn.
Yeah, he did have that Plains we saw. John goes with an Overgrown Tomb here, or untapped for 2 life. He's got a Courser of Crufix pulled to the top of his hand. Another good roadblock against this green-white deck that really forces you to have the pump spells
Although Bradley has already made a pretty strong representation that he has pump spells
Yes.
at the ready. I mean, that attack with Experiment 1 last turn is a pretty strong indicator.
Yes. He's got a Pelucranos there unveiled on the top of his deck thanks to the Courser. Finds his red mana source, that's Brad. Scries away the card. And a second Fleece Mane Lion to make his Experiment 1 a 3/3. Attacks with a pair of 3/3s.
It's a good Fleece Mane line here. Again, you know, the Ooze still not capable of blocking anything.
Right. John takes his Pelucranos, reveals the stomping ground there.
And again, you can't even be confident that something like Pelucranos is good enough to stabilize the board because of Selesnya Charm. That's a very specific angle of attack that the Selesnya deck has access to that many decks in Standard do not.
Yep. The aggro deck with a clean removal spell for big creatures. That's one card. It's probably my favorite card in the deck. Just the ability to make crazy plays, kill giant creatures.
Top card of John's deck reveal, please.
So he deploys the Pelucranos there.
And Mizium Mortar's on top, so
Got
John,
to play around it now.
yeah, John is still pretty far away. I mean, he's only got 4 mana and only 2 red, but
Yeah.
it's on the radar.
With the information, that's very important. That's a lot of the things I've heard bad about Courser of Crewfix is that the opposing player gets all the information.
Oh, I've seen plenty of games where it matters.
Yeah. Because that Mizium Mortars is super effective, hidden, but now Bradley should know not to play into it.
We'll see what Bradley wants to do here. He does have Selesnya Charm plus Mizium Mortars. He can remove both of John's threats. Of course, that opens up Scavenging Ooze to potentially do some damage here in the long term, but this is a pretty good opening to make some real inroads on John's board.
And Bradley's got the often not seen Mutavault in the Selesnya type aggro deck. Uses the Selesnya Charm on the Pelucranos. And gets in there with a 3 of a kind of 3/3s. Experiment 1 making its best Fleece Lane lineup.
I think
Impersonation.
John might actually be contemplating a double block here.
Now, how much mana did Bradley have up?
He has 2 mana left over.
Okay. Yeah, this is a tough spot to be in for a double block.
Well, there's Mutavault and Temple, so you don't have to worry about Selesnya
Yeah,
Charm.
true,
You don't have to
true.
worry about Boros Charm. So it's not necessarily a bad spot to get a double block on. It looks safe on the surface, but is John willing to give up a Courser and an Ooze here?
That's a good point. Yep. I want to see how many Mutavaults Bradley has in here. That is a greedy Mutavault. He's got 2 of them.
Well, his mana's fixed now. I mean, you know.
John opts for no blocks there. Drops to 7? Or did...
He put it in front of
I
the
thought he had
Experiment 1. The
okay.
Fleece Mane Lions got through.
Sorry. So he's got the Mortars.
1 creature in the graveyard right now for
got
the
a-
Scavenging Ooze.
Got a Domri in his hand.
The problem is, again, that if Bradley decides to just go monstrous with the Fleece Mane Lion next turn, John's not really in a position to handle that.
Yep.
He can make his Ooze up to a 4/4 as things currently stand, but that's not big enough. Courser can't do anything.
He uses the Mortars on just one of the Lions. And has an Elvish Mystic. Of course, the Reaper there on the top of his deck for next turn. He's got the Stormbred Dragon as well in his hand. Passes back.
All right, we'll see what Bradley wants to do this turn. Looks as though he's found a Banisher Priest.
Still looking for the 5th land, too, to have the option for Monstrous. It looks like he's got the Stomping Ground in hand.
Yeah, he's got a Stomping Ground and a Plains. And again, it's just, at the risk of repeating myself here, this 4/4 Fleece Mane Lion that is indestructible is just really hard for John to answer. And with John's life total the way that it is right now, it's essentially the Abyss. John
Correct.
can't afford to allow this to get through.
Yep, once it's Monstrous, I mean, he does have a Stormbred Dragon in his hand. That is John, which can effectively sit there and, stand in front of it all game.
Yep. But Bradley has access to Mortars in his list, so even Stormbreath Dragon isn't necessarily going to get the job done.
So now Brad has some decisions to make here.
I mean, he's moving that Banisher Priest around, but the thing is, John doesn't even have any particularly good things to Banisher Priest right now. None of his creatures are much more significant than any of the other in play.
Yeah, I'm not even sure which creature I would take with that.
Exactly, yeah.
Banisher Priest
They
at
all
this
look
point.
about the same in quality right now.
Another thing I like about the Fleece main line is you can just always threaten that attack with it and then Monstrous, depending on what their read of the situation is. Plus, if you use the mana to Monstrous, you know, you're using your mana efficiently and you still have gas in your hand.
Yeah, I like testing the waters here. Let's start here.
And John throws the Elvish Mystic in front of it. And Brad passes. Makes the ooze a little bigger there.
So Bradley passing here, I think, is a representation that he's gonna go for it.
John takes the Reaper, has another Sylvan Caryatid on top.
And once Fleece Main Lion gets monstrous, then all of a sudden Ajani becomes a kill. There's
Yep.
there's a lot of things that it's not even just about this 4/4 indestructible that's already going to be a challenge for John. It's a lot of his draws also become lethal.
Yeah, at this point, John now knows that it's going to be a 4/4 indestructible and has to plan his game accordingly the rest of the way now, knowing, oh, ooh. He opts to not monstrous at end of turn there.
And that's potentially a really big disaster here because he did have the opening of saying, I'm going to monstrous this turn, untap, Banisher Priest something. Now if he wants to deploy this Banisher Priest, which he kind of has to do because the Reaper's too big.
Right. Yeah, that's an unfortunate misstep there for Bradley. So Bradley's going to burn the mortars on the ooze, use the Banisher Priest on the Reaper, and now he doesn't have the mortars for the dragon. John has, and also leaves the lion open for removal.
Yep. Still gets him for 3 though. And a lot of pressure on John to find a land this turn.
Yes. Finds a Blood Crypt, which will only shock him for 1 with the Courser there in play, if that's what he wants to do.
Well, it's hard to get away from casting the Stormbreath Dragon this turn. You know, the rest of his hand is just 0/3s and a Domri. None of this provides any defense against the 3/3s that are in play. He does have the option of Domri fighting the Banisher Priest. There is something compelling
To
about
get
that.
his Reaper back.
Get the Reaper back.
And if Bradley's not going to monstrous the Fleece main line, that might be the way to go, but it's hard pressed to not put a Stormbreath Dragon into play here. Shocks himself in half. And that's another dragon on top, which is quite good. John is opting to use the Domri here to fight the priest, like you said, get his Reaper back.
He's trying to
Play
gum
the
up the ground a
Caryatid.
little bit. A lot of lethal draws here for Bradley, though. Ajani, Boros Charm, Core Clan Rampager, depending on the way that John blocks.
And that's one thing this
And there-
deck allows you to do is to play to those outs.
And there's a Boros Charm.
Off the top for 4 damage.
That's
enough
exact
for the
0.
victory. So, as you can see, Bradley, that's the that's the bonus of having the Boros Charm in your deck. Just a card that you can rip off the top and kill him.
There were some things there I think that Bradley could have done a lot differently to give himself insurance in some of those spots against Mizzium Mortars or just with the progression of the game, but was able to get a Boros Charm for exact 0, 8-0, most likely locking up a top 8 berth now, assuming that he can double draw the next